It's one of the biggest debates in golf. What is more important, distance or accuracy? Well, on the one hand, it's probably clear that you need a certain amount of distance to be able to shoot low scores, but on the other hand, accuracy is essential too, right? Well, let's clear it up in this video. Hi guys, my name is Kevin and I'm normally working as a data and strategy expert in Formula 1, but probably like you, I'm also a very passionate amateur golfer and I was always obsessed with the question, what really does make a good score on golf? And even though I've always been a big stats guy, after I've read tons of books, articles, watched videos and did my own research about golf strategy and course management, I realized I was playing golf all wrong, and you're probably too. So I think we're all familiar with statements like long and wide go together and accuracy is more important than distance, especially off the tee. Well, of course, I don't know which side you're on, but maybe you can write that in the comments. So what do you think is more important for a good score on golf, distance or accuracy? So as I said, I got pretty deep into data and actually experts pretty much agree that one aspect is more important than the other one. But before we come to that, I want to tell you how it was for me personally in my golf life, so to say, to find the right balance between distance and accuracy, because as I said, I was doing pretty much everything wrong. So I started playing golf when I was 13 years old, which is now more than 12 years ago, and I had a pretty fast start to the game. So I don't know how it is for your country, but in Germany, if you're new to the game, you start with a set handicap of 54. But as I was playing tennis and soccer before starting golf, I kind of already had a good touch for the ball. So only after 1 year of playing golf with the age of 14, I had a handicap of 9.2. So getting from the beginner level to single handicap golf pretty much took me a year. And I can tell you, it was not because, but despite of my distance. So with the age of 14 years, I was still pretty small and I could barely hit my driver over 200 yards. So basically every par 4 for me would look like that. I would hit my driver off the tee, do a layup with my 3-wood to about 30 yards in front of the green, and from there I would get the up and down basically 1 out of 2 times because, as I said, I had a pretty good touch for the ball, so my short game was very good initially. But now 12 years later my game has dramatically changed. So I still have a pretty good short game, so that aspect hasn't changed, but my long game now is very different. I would say my average driving distance is something around 270 yards, but actually my dispersion is massive, and not only with my driver but also with my long irons and even with my shorter irons. So where do I stand now in terms of scoring? So right now I have a low single handicap, which is of course better than when I was 14, but actually I expected a bit more because I not only got longer but also way more consistent with my ball striking. So if we take my standard round of golf, I pretty much played consistent par golf until I blow up on one hole with a triple bogey or even worse. And from that point onward, it only goes downhill. So I personally struggle a lot with consistently keeping my ball in play for 18 holes, which was basically the main reason why I got deep into the topic of golf strategy and course management. But the question is that a result of my increased distance? So because I got longer off the tee, I also got wilder? Well, I think now is the time to get deeper into data and have a look what experts actually say. And the best book you can pretty much read about course management and golf strategy is the book right behind me. Every Shot Counts from Columbia professor Mark Brody, the famous godfather of the strokes gain system in golf. So he not only analyzed PGA Tour data, but also amateur data, which is important for us. But first, let's talk about PGA Tour data because you can see a clear pattern emerging. So PGA Tour players' level of accuracy off the tee reaches from 2.7 to 4.4 degrees. So what does that mean? So in relation to the middle of the fairway, the most accurate player on the PGA Tour has an average dispersion of 2.7 degrees and the least accurate player a dispersion of 4.4 degrees, so we can say that the whole field is separated by 1.7 degrees. But Mark Brody found also out that the level of average driving distance reaches from 280 to 320 yards. So the shortest hitter would hit it normally 280 yards and the longest 320 yards on average. So the interesting question would now be, of course, what aspect would lower your score faster? To gain more driving distance or to try to get more accurate? And due to a strokes gain system, Mark Brody found that out. He calculated for PGA Tour players that 5 yards more distance off the tee are worth the same like 1 degree more accuracy. And when I read this fact, it blew my mind, honestly, because 5 yards seem like nothing, but 1 degree more accuracy when the whole PGA Tour field is only separated by 1.7 degrees is actually quite a lot. But he also found out more interesting things. For example, he said that there was no correlation on the PGA Tour between more length and more dispersion, and he actually came to the conclusion that longer hitters tend to be straighter hitters. So apparently long and wide don't seem to go together. But not only Mark Brody, but also other experts stated that distance is actually more important than accuracy. But the question for us is that also true for amateurs? And if it's true, then the next question would be, why do I struggle so much with keeping my score together now compared to my 14-year-old me? So Mark Brody not only analyzed the average dispersion of PGA Tour players, but also for amateurs. And he found out that the average 90 golfer, which I would say is a handicap 12 to handicap 15 golfer, has an average dispersion of 6.5 degrees and is also hitting it shorter than the PGA Tour players. And his conclusion was, well, longer hitters are also straighter hitters because PGA Tour players are longer than handicap 10 players, for example, but they also hit the ball straighter, while handicap 10 players are also longer than handicap 25 players, for example, but also hit the ball straighter. So in his book he wrote that distance is actually even more important for amateurs than for tour pros. But why is that the case? Because actually in scoring there's a massive upside if you're able to hit your second shot on the green on par 5s or drive drivable par 4s. He stated that the free shot strategy on par 5s compared to the aggressive approach costs you on average 2 to 3 strokes alone during a full round of golf, and it's certainly a topic for a future video. But of course, if you don't have the distance, you can't attack. It's simple. And actually, if you go deeper into data, you see that not even PGA Tour players make birdie every time when they have a 100-yard shot left, which is basically the third shot when you play the layup strategy on a par 5. So do you actually know what the scoring average for a PGA Tour player is from 100 yards? I can tell you, it's 2.8 strokes. So in other words, only 2 out of 10 times a PGA Tour player makes birdie from 100 yards. So what does it mean for us? And why do I personally struggle so much with my scoring despite being way longer than years ago? Well, there's a basic rule of thumb that I can pretty much explain with an analogy to Formula 1. As I said, I normally work in Formula 1 as a data analyst and strategy expert, and last year when I went through historical data, I pretty much found out that Max Verstappen actually could be the fastest driver of the at least 20 years in Formula 1, maybe even ever. But of course on paper he's still quite a bit away from being the most successful driver in Formula 1 history, especially regarding championships but also race wins. But if you analyze lap time data and actual pace, you can come to that conclusion. But Max Verstappen's career path in Formula 1 is interesting. So he joined the sport in 2015 as a 17-year-old and he was insanely fast from the beginning. But he had a problem. He was crashing. And he was crashing a lot, and he continued to crash. And in 2018, his 4th year in Formula 1, so with way more experience than the years before, he continued to crash. So I remember that season, and many experts said, well, yes, he is very fast, but he will never be a world champion because he just makes too many mistakes. So speaking in golf terms, he was hitting it mighty far off the tee, but ended up being in the hazard all the time. On the other side, there was a Formula 1 driver that raced from 2022 to 2024 for Alfa Romeo/Sauber. I personally watched every Formula 1 race since 2016 and I can't remember a single situation where he crashed by his own fault. So he was a very consistent driver and I can tell you his name, Guan Yu Zhou. And you might be asking yourself, who the hell is Guan Yu Zhou? And yes, exactly that's the point. In Formula 1 there's a basic rule about drivers that says it is easier to make a fast but unreliable driver consistent than make a consistent but slow driver fast. And I actually think it's the same for golf. So after 3.5 years, Max Verstappen stopped crashing while keeping his insanely fast pace. And now he's considered as one of the best drivers, maybe the best we've ever seen in the sport. On the other side, at the end of 2024, Guan Yu Zhou lost his seat in Formula 1, despite his consistent performances, but he was simply too slow to compete. So coming back to golf, there's also a basic rule of thumb for our problem. Get distance first, learn to handle it later. Personally, I couldn't handle my longer tee shots, as you have now probably seen in the footage. So with more distance, it's a fine line. It's a bit like with a sharp knife in your hands. But the solution is not to dull the knife so we no longer can hurt ourselves, but it is more about handling it and using it to our advantage. And I'm still learning this process myself. But the question is, How do you handle that sharp knife around the golf course? And I can tell you, it's with proper golf strategy and course management. And if you have now realized that this may be an important topic for you to score lower and become a better golfer, then make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on future tips and rules about course management. Subscribing is absolutely for free, and you best start with my latest video where I explained that aggressive aiming, like most amateurs do, costs you on average 3 strokes per round. So see you there.